was no secret, and the High Representative was very clear ahead of the trip to Moscow why he goes there and what he wants to achieve. And the main objective was to deliver firm, unequivocal, clear messages from the EU about the case of Mr. Navalny and about the state of our relations, about Russia's role and behavior in Europe. This was done. This was delivered very clearly and very firmly to the Russian counterpart. As you have seen in a blog of Mr. Borrell, the discussion reached sometimes levels of tension. So he was very clear. So he delivered. And the deliverable was, the result was what Eric just described, the reaction of Russian counterparts to the efforts of the EU to try to see if we can address the differences and neuralgic points in our relations. And the reaction which was received basically is pointing to a direction which Russia wants to go in pursuing the communication or confrontation with the European Union. So in this case, the Russian reaction, both by the way how the visit was organized, by the way how the press conference was going, by the way what Mr. Lavrov was saying, by the way what the Russian authorities did against the European diplomats and against Mr. Navalny on the very same day, I think that offered very clear indication in which direction Russia wants to go. And this will now feed into the ongoing discussions among the member states, next one being on the FAC, during the FAC on the 22nd, and then among the leaders of the EU at the European Council in March, to see what consequences we will draw from this. On the regrets, of course he has no regrets that he went to Moscow. I mean, he's a diplomat, and diplomacy is about engaging also when it's not pleasant, engaging also with partners which are difficult, engaging on their home turf, to come there and to have the courage, instead of shouting from behind the fence or from the safety of a wall behind which you might be hiding, engaging with him on his home turf, telling him what we see, what we expect, and what we are concerned about. So, of course, there are no regrets. He needed to go. He delivered the clear European positions, clear European messages, and he got an indication whether there is a willingness to see how to overcome the existing differences and how to reverse the negative trend in our relations. And about the information what the HRVP received about the expulsion of the 3 European diplomats, he stated it himself in the blog. I'm not going to comment on the procedures and processes. He learned about it during the negotiations, and of course the source of the information is always one of the member states, because they are affected and they know about it. So this is so much about this issue. But again, in the course of the discussion, reacting basically in real time, he stressed very clearly that he is condemning this decision, that there is absolutely no justification, that we are rejecting the justification put up by the Russian partners, alleging that these diplomats have been engaging in activities which don't go in line with their mandate and international treaties. And he stressed that this is unacceptable, and he stressed full EU solidarity. So again, in real time, he was delivering a clear European view to a counterpart, which is making it difficult to find improvements in the relations, and he was doing it on his own turf. So how else do you want to engage with the partner?
Thank you, Peter. There's a follow-up. Richard.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, I might have not expressed myself in the best way regarding the regrets. I wonder if you had any regrets specifically about the press conference, considering that some people, including members of the Foreign Affairs Council, clearly were critical of some of the things he said. Also, if I can have another question, if I may. I know that this was discussed at the midday briefing on Friday. But I'm still not clear about what the EU or the Commission response is, because when we talked about him visiting Navalny and not, I remember that Nabila said that would send a wrong signal, because it would show that the EU somehow accepts his imprisonment. Now, I remember quite clearly that the former EU Enlargement Commissioner Stefan Füle, a man that you are very familiar with, Peter, since you were his spokesperson in previous times, he went to see Madame Tymoshenko, and she was imprisoned in Ukraine, even though the EU didn't agree with her imprisonment. I also remember around the same time that the predecessor of Mr. Borrell, Madame Ashton, visited Mohamed Morsi in prison in Egypt. And that was also something that the EU were very much against. So when did this EU policy change that we don't visit, or that you guys don't visit political prisoners that you don't consider to be political prisoners that have been wrongfully imprisoned?
Peter.
Thank you, Ricard. On the first point or specification, I would again just quote the wiser words which have been said here by Eric, that the press conference was basically just one part of the overall picture. So one has to focus on the overall picture. About what you are saying, the discord or the reactions from some members of the Foreign Affairs Council, well, there will be Foreign Affairs Council on the 22nd of February. There will be opportunity to discuss thoroughly among the ministers with the HRVP the consequences of what happened in Moscow and how Russia took our signals and our readiness to engage. The same was happening before the trip. There was also discussion at the FAC, and HRVP was explaining very clearly why he goes and what he wants to achieve with this visit. On this, the discussions are ongoing. Again, we were never making any secret about the aims of the visit and about the objectives, and these objectives have been delivered. On these objectives, the HRVP delivered. Now, when you are talking about Mr. Navalny and the possible visit to the prison, it's not about changing the policy. It's not changing the principles or something. What Nabila explained on Friday was very clear. You have to see each case as very specific. We have different level of relationship with our partners, with the third countries, and we have very different circumstances right now in that particular moment. And everything is taken into account when it comes to seeing whether it is possible, necessary, or conducive in that particular moment to proceed with a specific step. Now, on Mr. Navalny, the HRVP stated, again, one of these objectives was to be very clear about EU's position on the case and handling of Mr. Navalny by the Russian authorities. He did it. We also were in touch with the team of Mr. Navalny during the course of the visit and ahead to see how could we proceed in this direction. And let me reiterate maybe one thing, that the strong EU message on the sentencing and treatment of Mr. Navalny was passed. The HRVP demanded his unconditional and immediate release, as well as those people who have been arbitrarily detained in connection with his return. He also stressed to the Russian partners the call from the EU, repeated call, about the urgency to investigate the assassination attempt with chemical agent against Mr. Navalny. Nothing was done on this. He delivered this message once again. Now, of course, there was a discussion, and in the course of the heated discussion on Friday with Minister Lavrov, the HRVP then asked Minister Lavrov if he could meet Mr. Navalny during this visit, as per usual diplomatic practice, which was applied under specific circumstances also in the past, as you explained. And against this usual practice, Minister Lavrov referred the HRVP to make a direct request to the court. Now, if you are familiar with the procedures, with the court procedures in Russia, you would know that it would take much more time than the duration of the visit, so the issue was then done. But again, I would like to stress that senior member of HRVP's delegation met with Mr. Navalny's lawyer during HRVP's visit, and we maintain the contact with his team, and this is very important.
Thank you. I see many hands raised on this issue. Nicolas.
Bonjour Peter. Je voulais savoir pour ma part si le représentant a parlé d'éventuellement suivre des sanctions. Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il compte avant lundi ou d'ici lundi actionner notamment le mécanisme de sanctions sur les droits de l'homme et introduire une proposition de ce fait? Et deuxièmement, je voulais savoir ce qu'il pensait du montage qu'ont fait les Russes de ces déclarations sur le vaccin Covid-19 Sputnik et de la façon dont ça a été interprété au niveau dans l'opinion publique. Je te remercie beaucoup.
Merci. Au niveau de l'opinion publique en Europe ou en Russie?
de la façon dont lui ou vous voyez ce montage en fait entre un ami critiquant le vaccin et un Josep Borrell saluant le vaccin russe et de la façon dont ça a été, je dirais, utilisé par les Russes. Et donc, est-ce qu'il a un peu pas l'impression d'être tombé dans un guet-apens très bien organisé par le ministère russe des Affaires étrangères?
Merci. Sur le deuxième point, je ne veux pas engager dans ce domaine parce que ce sont les spéculations. Le haut représentant a dit qu'il a dit, elle a exprimé son opinion sur la nécessité pour trouver coopération globale et internationale pour affronter ces crises globales. Et la première question sur les sanctions, il a indiqué que les pays membres, dans les discussions sur les implications et conséquences de cette visite, vont discuter aussi cette option, ces possibilités, mais comme toujours, le processus sur désignation, sur voir comment on peut réagir avec les mesures restrictives, avec les sanctions, c'est un processus confidentiel et ce n'est pas pour nous faire commentaire sur ce processus. La chose très importante est que nous avons déjà beaucoup de substances, beaucoup d'input, comme on dit en anglais, input, pour les discussions des pays membres. Nous avons vu la réaction russe et c'est maintenant pour l'Union européenne pour discuter et juger la réponse appropriée. Et on va commencer avec la discussion demain dans le Parlement européen et aussi dans le Conseil des affaires étrangères le 22e février.
Merci. David.
Oui, merci Eric. David Carretta, Radio Radicale. J'aurais plusieurs questions en fait. La première, tu as dit que le haut représentant a donné les messages et de ce point de vue, ça a été, disons, un succès. Mais moi, les messages que j'ai entendus, c'était silence pendant que le ministre des Affaires étrangères russe critiquait l'Union européenne et accusait l'Union européenne de beaucoup de choses que je ne crois pas étaient acceptables. J'ai entendu le haut représentant saluer le vaccin russe Sputnik 5 et se faire manipuler après par la propagande. J'ai entendu prendre les distances sur Cuba et là aussi à des fins de manipulation. J'ai entendu dire qu'il demandait la libération de Navalny, mais qu'aucun État membre avait demandé des sanctions. Ce qui, en fait, est faux, sauf si on parle de propositions formelles avec les personnes à mettre dans la liste, etc. Donc, je me demande s'il ne regrette pas le message qu'il a fait entendre au nom de l'Union européenne pendant cette conférence de presse, qui était peut-être seulement une partie du voyage, mais c'était la partie la plus visible. Deuxième question pour Eric. Il y a plusieurs députés européens qui sont en train de signer une lettre en demandant à la présidente de la Commission les démissions de M. Borrell, ou simplement sa destitution. Est-ce que tu as une réaction par rapport à ça? Merci.
Je vais déjà répondre à la deuxième question parce que ma réponse sera brève. Je viens d'exprimer le soutien de la présidente de la Commission pour le haut représentant. Donc ça, c'est une chose qui est très claire. Et deuxièmement, tu dis que des parlementaires européens sont en train de rédiger une lettre. Nous ne l'avons pas reçue à ma connaissance. Donc je ne peux pas commenter là-dessus. Mais la présidente exprime son soutien au représentant vice-président de la Commission. Sur la première question, je repasse la parole à Peter.
Merci. Beaucoup d'aspects, mais sur les propagandes, je ne veux pas commenter. Ce sont les interprétations et les accusations, etc. Tout le monde a vu la conférence de presse, tout le monde a vu et comprend, j'espère compris aussi ce que le haut représentant a dit. Ce que M. Lavrov a dit n'était pas rien de nouveau. Il a répété que le gouvernement, les autorités russes répètent toujours. les impressions russes sur les actions de l'Europe, et aussi un peu de désinformation. Et les choses que nous connaissons déjà sont partie des répertoires russes. Pour le haut représentant, la conférence de presse, ce n'est pas une plateforme pour avoir les discussions ou les confrontations. Le haut représentant est diplomate. Elle était très claire avec le message qu'il voulu délivrer ou livrer dans la conférence de presse, dans sa introduction, dans son remarque de conférence de presse. Et vous avez dit que la conférence de presse, c'était une partie plus visible, mais ce n'était pas une partie avec plus de substance. Les substances, le contenu est discuté dans les négociations. Et on a eu une négociation très longue, avec les niveaux de tension aussi, très, très féroces aussi, où les représentants étaient très clairs sur les messages de l'Union européenne et aussi sur l'opinion des côtés européens sur les actions russes. Donc, les autres choses, ce sont l'interprétation que je ne veux pas commenter, mais il n'y avait silence des parties des hauts représentants parce qu'elle était très vocale dans les plateformes des négociations avec M. Lavrov.
Alors, pour rappel, nous allons terminer à 13h car nous avons un briefing technique sur le Recovery and Resilience Facility. Donc, je vous demanderai d'être bref. David, je te donne un bref follow-up, s'il te plaît, parce que tu as pas mal de collègues qui veulent la parole. Très bref, s'il te plaît.
Oui, sur les sanctions, est-ce qu'il a menti en conférence de presse?
Le haut représentant a dit que dans le moment qu'on a parlé, il n'y avait pas aucune suggestion ou proposition concrète.
Voilà. Lukáš.
Hello?
Yes, Lukáš, you have the floor.
In recent years, the European Union imposed several types of sanctions on Russia. And could you give us a measurable effect of these sanctions? I mean, whether these sanctions have any impact on human rights in Russia, democracy, whether these sanctions have any impact on freedom of speech, on the situation in Ukraine, in Georgia. My question is are these sanctions effective, actually? And my second question, I would like to know whether Mr. Borrell was surprised, actually, what did he hear from Mr. Lavrov during the press conference in Moscow? I mean, whether he was surprised by this critic on European Union and United States. Thank you.
Thanks, Lukáš. On the sanctions, you know very well that the EU sanctions are implemented and overseen by the member states. They also do the evaluation of how effective are the sanctions and how they work. But the impact of sanctions on Russia, I mean, there are several frameworks of sanctions against Russia. We have the sectorial sanctions, we have the sanctions in connection to the annexation of Crimea, we have the sanctions related to the situation in the east of Ukraine and Russia's actions there. We have sanctions which were introduced in very quick response to the poisoning attempt against Mr. Navalny. Last year, 6 individuals and 1 entity were already sanctioned. And you know that these sanctions, they take their toll. I mean, when it comes to individuals, they cannot travel to the EU. Their funds are frozen. It is forbidden for EU individuals, for EU entities to make funds available to them. The sectorial sanctions, I think there has been already so much written and reported about how it affects the Russian economy. So that's very clear that they have impact. Another impact is also they serve as an example also to our partners. There is a number of countries which align themselves with EU restrictive measures. And this is the case also with Russia. So our partners, countries in the accession process, partners in the framework of EAA, and also other countries can align with those sanctions, and they do on a case-by-case basis. And the sanctions, we keep stressing all the time that the sanctions are not the aim, they are not the objective of our policy. This is, at this stage, the only tangible instrument the member states are willing to use in order to show their displeasure or disagreement with actions of the partners. So there is an agreement by the EU 27 member states to sanction someone for something. And as I said, the review, the evaluation, how the sanctions are then biting is up to the member states. But this is a very important tool, but it's not the objective of the EU policy.
David.
Thanks, Eric. David Herzenhorn with Politico. Peter, I wonder if we could just clarify a few factual points that maybe were left open-ended from the press conference in Moscow on Friday. First, on this case in Latvia, where some individuals are accused, charged with violating sanctions, is there any question in the EU's mind that their human rights are being violated? The High Representative suggested this is a matter for the Latvian courts, but I'm not asking if there's a question about their innocence or guilt of the charges, but is there any doubt on the EU's part that their human rights have been put in danger? On the question of whether the EU is an unreliable partner, is there any basis that Lavrov has for saying that? On Cuba, if you could just say, is there a basis for equating the US embargo and other measures with Crimea sanctions, or does the EU in fact reject that comparison that the foreign minister had made there? And then one question, if you would, on the High Representative's blog, which is out, where he wrote, "I returned to Brussels with deep concern over the perspectives of development of Russian society and Russia's geostrategic choices." I think we often hear, as Navalny and others testified to the European Parliament in November, an urge to keep the Russian people and society separate from the government and its geostrategic decisions. And is the High Representative suggesting there that in fact he equates those two, that he's both worried about the development of Russian society and where the Russian people are in combination with the decisions and actions being taken by the Kremlin? Thank you.
Thank you, David. I take it from the end. Well, he meant it more in terms of that he's worried and concerned by where the Russian people are being taken. That's by the current behavior of Russian authorities. You know very well that one of the principles of our policy with Russia, how to deal with Russia under current circumstances, is to increase our engagement with civil society. And that's why the High Representative during his trip to Moscow had also a number of meetings with representatives of civil society, NGOs, academic sector, with people who we want to support and engage with, despite the fact that they are facing more and more restrictions in the society. On the Cuban issue, let me just set something straight. I mean, the HR was asked about the EU-Cuba Joint Council, which he was chairing, and also this last-minute decision by the outgoing Trump administration to designate Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. And he conveyed EU position on this. The EU position is not new. I mean, we shared it days before with a number of media, immediately after the outgoing US administration put Cuba on this list. So it was not secret. It was not nothing new what HRVP said. And this is EU's position on the matter doesn't change. No matter whether we are in Brussels, in Moscow, in Havana, or in Washington, it's still the same. And by the way, it was also contained, this position was also contained in the final press release after this EU-Cuba Joint Council. On the case of Latvian journalists, I think this is more for my colleagues dealing with justice affairs, but HRVP was very also clear in responding to the case, saying we have a functioning and independent rule of law system in the European Union with independent judiciary. So whatever problems there are, they are being addressed through this system, and people can have guarantee and rights that it will be addressed in independent, impartial way, taking into account and respecting their rights, and not to prosecute people for their political convictions, and not to try assassinate people for their political engagement.
Merci. Camille.
Entendez?
Oui, vas-y. Oui.
Ah, bonjour. Oui, bonjour, Camille Sergey de l'agence Europe. J'avais juste une petite question. Si M. Borrell a appris pendant sa rencontre avec M. Lavrov le fait que 3 diplomates européens allaient être expulsés, je voulais savoir pourquoi il n'en avait pas parlé en conférence de presse, mais avait réagi par après par un statement. Merci.
Merci pour sa question, mais comme nous avons essayé d'expliquer déjà, elle a appris sur cette nouvelle après la conférence de presse à la fin de la deuxième partie des discussions avec M. Lavrov sur le déjeuner.
Okay, we continue on Russia. Athanasios.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I will read from the HRVP's blog. Europe and Russia are drifting apart. It seems that Russia is progressively disconnecting itself from Europe and looking at democratic values as an existential threat. Now, this phrase means that we are now back to the pre-Glasnost and Perestroika era. We are back in the Brezhnev era of relations with that part of the world. And since back then we used to prepare when we had a neighbor that was like this, are you going to propose preparedness to the member states, specifically on the level of threats that now arise from such a neighbor, concrete preparedness, or are we in the Rocky IV mindset? You can change, I can change, and so forth. Thanks.
Athanasios, I think I have answered that question in a way by saying that, of course, the High Representative Vice President will report tomorrow on his trip to Moscow, and that, of course, the Commission will hear what he has to say, and that this will feed into the reflection process of the College on our policies vis-à-vis Russia. So it is not here today that we can actually start to sketch out what would be the appropriate response from the European Union following this trip to Moscow. Joe, question on Russia.
No, not on Russia. It was foreign affairs, but I'll leave you contacting Ariana because I know you want to finish. So cheers.
Okay, please only keep your hand raised if it is on Russia. Augustine, I know it's on something else. I will go to Pascal Verdeau.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Je voulais prolonger la question de David tout à l'heure sur la colère d'un certain nombre de députés européens. Ce matin, un député européen disait que finalement, la diplomatie européenne, c'était un couteau sans lame. Un autre d'un groupe politique important affirmait que M. Borrell était parti à Moscou sans véritable mandat politique, en tout cas sans mandat politique robuste. Et finalement, on s'aperçoit, eu égard au peu de résultats de ce voyage, on s'aperçoit en creux que le poids politique de la diplomatie européenne par rapport aux géants russes est effectivement très, très limité. Tu as dit tout à l'heure à la tribune que M. Lavrov, sur le fond, tenait déjà ce type de propos. Sur la forme, il a été d'une brutalité assez extraordinaire. Et ma question est la suivante. Est-ce que la Commission européenne, la Commission géopolitique, n'est pas en train de découvrir la brutalité des rapports de force, avec une certaine naïveté du côté de la Commission?
Je pense que la Commission européenne est parfaitement consciente de l'environnement international dans lequel nous nous trouvons et agit en conséquence. Donc il y a de notre côté rigoureusement aucune naïveté. Mais cela dit, comme tu le sais, que ce soit ici sur le podium ou lors de nos rencontres avec des interlocuteurs étrangers, nous faisons toujours preuve du sens de la mesure et de la courtoisie qui sied aux relations diplomatiques internationales. C'est une question peut-être de European Way of Life, de culture européenne, que de savoir distinguer la forme et le fond. Je crois que ce que Peter n'a pas arrêté de dire ici depuis le début de son intervention, c'est que le message qui a été passé aux autorités russes était particulièrement clair, et c'est un message qui vient du haut représentant au nom de l'Union européenne. Sur la forme, bien entendu, nous sommes et nous resterons toujours des personnes courtoises, mais en sachant très bien que nous connaissons très très bien quels sont les rapports de force et quelles peuvent être parfois les pratiques. Nous continuons pour 3 minutes encore, toujours sur les questions russes, et je passe la parole à Jacobo.
Je voulais savoir, je vais la poser en anglais, concerning the Lavrov news press conference on Friday. Do you see any parallelism between Navalny and the Catalan independentist leader who tried to get an unilateral independence and are imprisoned in Spain? Do you see that there is a relation between both? Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, what I said in the case of Latvia, the fundamental difference between Russia and the EU is in the way how the rule of law is understood, how it's enforced, and how the judiciary operates. In the EU, the member states have enough safeguards to make sure that the rights of people are protected and enforced because we have a functioning system of rule of law and independent judiciary. So of course this parallel was absolutely out of place, but it was part of the usual repertoire the Russian partners are using when they want to try to portray EU as someone having double standards. But this is not a new practice, and it is not a conducive practice because we've been debunking this with arguments and facts for a very long time. And what we wanted to achieve was to see whether Russia is willing to address the differences we have currently in our relations, which are at the historical law. And the response we got through the press conference, through all these related events, and also in the negotiations, is something that visibly goes in different direction. And this is the substance which will feed into the discussions of the college tomorrow, the EP discussion tomorrow in the afternoon, FAC on the 22nd of February, and the European Council in March.